Athena Pallas, daughter of Zeus, born from his head in full battle armor, view the history of mortals differently than my fierce brother Ares. He loves only blood and the clang of iron, while I love strategy, intellect, and skill. I know the taste of quiet victory, when the enemy falls not from the blow of a spear, but from his own delusion, cleverly undermined by reason. I have seen many wars, but the one I am about to tell you about was woven on the canvas of fate not by a sword, but by pure reason. This is the story of how one man's genius broke the backbone of an empire that stretched from the Indus to the Nile. This is the story of my city and my chosen one, Themistocles. Do you remember the day when the mortal world held its breath? I remember. The gods do not forget the moments when the fate of an entire people hangs in the balance. It was 480 BC. At the top of Mount Aegaleo, towering over the strait, a golden throne was set up. Seated on it was a man who considered himself a god, the king of kings, Xerxes. He gazed down with a confidence bordering on madness, which we Olympians call hubris. For us, it is not just pride, but blindness, when a man ceases to see the limits of his nature and imagines that he can stand on a par with the immortals. His confidence was forged not from empty hopes, but from a terrifying reality. The army he brought from the east was so great that, according to the chronicles, when his soldiers stopped to rest, they drank rivers dry. His fleet, assembled from all corners of the conquered world, Phoenicians, Egyptians, Ionians, Cilicians, covered the horizon, turning the azure Aegean Sea into a forest of masts and sails. More than 1,000 ships. Never before had any mortal gathered such power in one fist. The very sight of this power was a weapon designed to suppress the will to resist. Xerxes did not come to fight. Wars are fought with equals. He came to punish. He came to wipe the very concept of freedom from the face of the earth, like erasing an inscription from a wax tablet with a sponge. In his view, a subject was not a citizen, but merely a grain of sand in a faceless mass, obliged to bow to the will of the king. He could already see the smoke rising from my sacred temples on the Acropolis. He could already taste victory, sweet as the dates of Babylon. In his eyes, the Greeks were just a scattered handful of fools doomed to slaughter. He believed that nature itself had submitted to him when he ordered the sea to be whipped and a bridge to be built across the Hellespont. For him, even the element of water was to be a path to victory, not an obstacle. But sitting on his golden throne, anticipating triumph, he made the cardinal mistake of any tyrant. He assessed the number of bodies, but did not weigh the strength of spirit. For him, courage was measured by the number of soldiers in the ranks, not by their willingness to die for an idea. He saw an army before him, but he did not see the mind that controlled it. Among the Greeks was one who saw this endless armada not as an overwhelming wave, but as a cumbersome, unwieldy beast whose enormous mass would be the cause of its own destruction. The gaze of Themistocles penetrated the appearance of strength and saw its vulnerable seams. The name of this man was Themistocles, son of Neocles, and I will tell you as a goddess who appreciates skill, he was not like the heroes of antiquity. He did not possess the divine beauty of Achilles or the mad strength of Ajax. He was not a king by birthright, like Leonidas. Themistocles was a man of a new era, a child of democracy, a politician to the core, an orator and a manipulator. His weapon was not a scroll of pedigree, but the ability to work with the crowd, to understand its fears and hopes. His weapon was not so much a sword as words and intellect. While the Spartans honed their spear thrusts, Themistocles honed his ability to see the future. He knew how to piece together scattered facts, rumours and omens into a single picture, like a mosaic artist assembling an image from small stones. I, Athena, gave him the spark that you call foresight. He was the architect of chaos for the Persians and the architect of salvation for the Hellenes. His mind was sharper than any Spartan sword, for a sword can kill one enemy at a time, but Themistocles' mind was prepared to destroy thousands with a single blow. To me, such minds are more precious than the richest sacrifices. Xerxes feared him, not because Themistocles could defeat his guard in combat. No, the great king feared him, though he realized this too late, because Themistocles was unpredictable. People who rely on brute force are always at a loss when faced with those who change the rules of the game on the fly. He turned war into a chess game, where the enemy's pieces moved not at the will of the player, but at the will of his opponent. It was a conflict between two philosophies: Eastern despotism, relying on overwhelming force and fear, and Greek metis, cunning wisdom, capable of finding a way out of a hopeless labyrinth. Where one world saw only a straight path forward, the other found a hidden path to the side. Themistocles was not a warrior in shining armour standing in the front row of the phalanx. His hands rarely gripped a spear, but his mind was constantly trying out new combinations of moves. He was a puppeteer, pulling the strings of history. And before facing Xerxes face to face, he had to win a war with his own people, changing the very essence of what it meant to be Athenian. This battle against habits, prejudices, and greed was no less dangerous than the battle against the Phoenician ships. Wisdom says that war requires three things: money, money, and more money. Themistocles understood this better than anyone else. He knew that without a material foundation, even the most inspiring speeches would remain empty words. A few years before Xerxes' shadow fell over Hellas, an event took place in Attica that I, Athena Ergane, the worker, directed with my own hand. In the state mines of Lavrion, in southern Attica, slaves digging deep into the earth stumbled upon a new, incredibly rich silver vein. Imagine dark tunnels, the rhythmic pounding of pickaxes, the weary breathing of people underground, and suddenly the glint of metal in the torchlight. This was not just wealth, it was a gift from fate. A sudden flood of silver, estimated at 100 talents, a huge sum for those times, poured into the Athenian treasury. For many, it seemed like a sign of the gods' favour, a promise of an easy life and feasts. In times of abundance, it is especially clear how much citizens are willing to think about tomorrow. Leaders like Aristides and the common people demanded that the money be shared. It was good money. It could be used to buy clothes, throw a feast, or purchase livestock. It was the path of pleasure, the path of peace. For most, the choice between today's wine and tomorrow's security is obvious, but Themistocles stood before the popular assembly like a rock. He understood that the 10 drachmas in each citizen's purse would be eaten and drunk away in a week, and the state would be left defenceless. He had to speak to the people in a language they did not like to hear, about sacrifice, delayed reward, and a danger that had not yet reached their shores. He did something that could have cost him his life. He called on the people to give up their rightful share of wealth in order to protect themselves from a vague threat in the future. He risked not only his career, but also the love of the people by daring to go against their immediate will. And a miracle worthy of being recorded in the annals of history happened. Thanks to Themistocles' incredible persistence, cunning, and oratory skills, the Athenians voted to give up personal enrichment. The silver from the Lavrian mines was used exclusively to build a fleet. With this money, 200 triremes were built, the very ships that would soon save Western civilization. For me, a goddess who observes human gatherings, this decision was like a flash of light in the thick clouds, a rare occasion when the collective mind rises above the instinct to take and consume immediately. Let me explain to you mortals what a trireme built with this money was. It was not just a boat. It was a weapon that punished quickly and inevitably, like the lightning of my father Zeus. Its design embodied the very idea that speed and precision could outweigh any weight. A long, narrow ship, designed for speed and maneuverability, Its contours resembled a predatory fish swiftly cutting through the waves. Every plank, every beam served a single purpose: to bring the moment of collision with the enemy closer. 170 rowers sat in the belly of the ship, arranged in 3 tiers. These were not slaves chained to their oars, but free citizens, patriots whose muscles worked in unison like a single mechanism. They were bound not by chains, but by their oath to the polis, and the understanding that the lives of their families on shore depended on the strength of their arms. The bow of the ship was crowned with a heavy bronze ram. The purpose of the trireme was not to board the enemy, but to ram it, breaking its oars or piercing its hull. At the moment of impact, all the accumulated human energy, the rhythm of the drums and commands, the flesh of wood and bronze, were transformed into a single, inexorable force. Themistocles knew that to stop Persia, a wall was needed, but not a stone wall which could be destroyed by siege engines, but a mobile wall of wood and human will. It was an unprecedented strategy. He effectively proposed replacing the usual stone fortifications with a fleet, a variable that required constant labour and training. Imagine a madman persuading the people to give up their food and wine today in order to forge a shield against monsters that no one has ever seen. That is exactly what Themistocles did. He lied to them, saying that the fleet was needed for war with the neighbouring island of Aegina, but his gaze was fixed far to the east. Sometimes, even wisdom must resort to deception to save those who refuse to see the coming storm. The ships were built, the wood was cut, the bronze was cast. The workshops hummed, the shipyards were filled with the clang of tools and the shouts of overseers. But Themistocles had a more difficult task ahead of him: to change the DNA of a land-based people. The Athenians, my beloved wards, were people of the earth. Their wealth was measured in olive groves, vineyards, and herds. They knew the rhythm of the seasons, the taste of dust in the fields, and the smell of sun-warmed stones. For the Greeks, war was the war of the hoplite, standing shoulder to shoulder in a phalanx, feeling the elbow of a comrade, planting their feet firmly on the ground and pressing shield against shield. In this formation, everyone felt the weight of their neighbour and the support under their feet. The sea, on the other hand, was considered an unstable, treacherous element, the domain of merchants and adventurers, but not of noble warriors. Themistocles had to reshape the very soul of his people. He had to turn a nation of farmers into a nation of sailors. He had to convince people who were used to seeing the horizon as the edge of their world to see it as both a road and a shield. This meant changing the idea of valour. Instead of a spear and shield, an oar and a battering ram. Instead of solid ground underfoot, a swaying deck. When messengers reported that Xerxes had crossed over to Europe, panic swept through Hellas. Fear of the countless army, rumours of burned cities, stories from fugitives. All this made even the brave tremble. The Athenians sent envoys to Delphi, to the oracle of Apollo, hoping for advice. For the Hellenes, the word of Pythia often meant more than the voice of any strategist, for in it they heard the echo of the will of the gods. Pythia's answer was terrible. All is doomed to destruction. The envoys did not dare return with such news. They begged for a second prophecy. And then the oracle uttered these mysterious words. Only wooden walls does Zeus give to Tritogeneia, to stand unbreakable for the salvation of you and your children. The interpretation of these words divided the city. The elders and conservatives cried out that the wooden walls were the old palisade around the Acropolis, and called for everyone to lock themselves in the temples. They clung to the image of the past, in which walls and altars provided security. It was a path leading to destruction, a path of passive defence. Then Themistocles entered the scene. I watched him from Olympus and smiled as I saw how skillfully he wove his web. He spoke not only as a strategist, but also as an interpreter of divine will, able to read between the lines. He declared that if God had meant destruction, he would not have called Salamis divine at the end of the prophecy. "Wooden walls are not fences," his voice thundered in the agora. "They are the sides of our ships." He seemed to turn the meaning of the oracle's words upside down, turning the citizens' gaze from the hill to the sea. Themistocles was the only strategist who dared to interpret the sacred text, not literally, but strategically. He convinced the people that their salvation lay not in the walls of the city, but on the water. He made them believe that leaving their homes and the graves of their ancestors was not cowardice, but the highest form of courage for the sake of victory. It was a radical shift in consciousness. People who were used to measuring honor with a plough and a spear suddenly heard that valor was now measured by the number of strokes per minute. The hoplite class was losing its monopoly on war. Now the saviors of the fatherland were the feta, poor people who had nothing but their hands to row with. Themistocles transformed Athens into a maritime power, democratizing war. For the first time, the poorest citizens were given not only a voice in the popular assembly, but also a decisive role on the battlefield. He used religion as a tool, not to deceive the gods, but to guide the people. It is said that even the disappearance of the sacred snake from the temple on the Acropolis was staged by him, so that the priests would declare, "The goddess has left the city and gone to the sea." For a believing Athenian, this was not just a metaphor, but a command from above. If even I, Athena, had gone to the ships, how could mortals remain on land? When, in 480 BC, the horizon blackened with Persian sails, there was no more time for debate. The battle of prophecies and interpretations gave way to a premonition of real steel and fire. The transformation was complete. The farmers took up oars. The situation in 480 BC was catastrophic. Leonidas and his 300 Spartans fell at Thermopylae. Their death became a symbol of steadfastness. But symbols do not hold back armies. Heroic, yes, but the passage to central Greece was open. The avalanche of the Persian army swept south, burning everything in its path. Boeotia surrendered, Thebes defected to the enemy. The road to Athens was clear. Many in Greece felt that the ground was slipping away from under their feet. Themistocles made a decision that would have made any ruler's heart tremble. He announced a total evacuation. This meant telling the people, the city is not its walls or its houses, the city is you. The famous Decree of Themistocles ordered women and children to be sent to safe places, and all men to board ships. Imagine this scene. Men leaving their wives and mothers on the shore, watching them cry. Boys clinging to their fathers' tunics, not knowing if they would ever see them again. Athens was deserted. The streets, which had been bustling with noise just a moment ago, fell silent, like a theatre after the end of a performance. My city had become a ghost town. Soon the Persians entered Athens. They looted the houses, killed the remaining defenders, and set fire to the Acropolis. My shrines, ancient olive trees, statues, everything was burned. The Greek fleet, anchored off the island of Salamis, saw the smoke. Horror seized the allies. Here, Themistocles faced an enemy no less dangerous than Xerxes: fear. The Spartan commander Eurybiades and other Peloponnesians wanted to immediately set sail and retreat to the Isthmus of Corinth, to build a wall and fight there. Themistocles understood that this would be suicide. He explained that the isthmus was open to the sea, where the Persians could easily surround the fleet, and that a landing force in the rear would render any wall useless. But fear is deaf to reason. When Themistocles began to speak at the Council of War, Eurybiades, in a rage, swung his stick at him. The Athenians' response has gone down in history. Strike, but listen first. These words became a symbol of how reason demands a voice even under threat of violence. Themistocles used his last argument, blackmail. "We have 200 ships," he said. "If you leave, we will put our families on them and sail to Italy to build a new city there, and you will be left alone against the Persians." The Spartans turned pale. Without the Athenian fleet, Sparta was doomed. Eurybiades gave in, and the Greeks remained at Salamis. But Themistocles knew that time was against Xerxes. A huge army means huge hunger, and the enemy's fleet is huge but slow. To win, they had to lure the beast into a trap. Seeing that the Greek ranks were wavering again, and many were ready to flee under cover of night, he decided on a move that could cost him his head. He began to play the double agent. He had a trusted slave and tutor of his children, named Sicinius, a Persian by birth. In secret, Themistocles sent him to the enemy camp with a message for the king. The essence of the lie was ingenious. The Athenian strategist wishes the king victory and reports that the Hellenes are seized with fear and are going to flee tonight. "This is your chance, O great king. Do not let them escape." Xerxes believed him, for vanity clouded his mind. He was flattered by the idea of the enemy's submission, and the desire to end the war before winter drove him forward. He immediately gave the fateful order. The Persian fleet set sail at night, blocking the exits from the straits and preventing the Greeks from escaping. Xerxes' rowers spent the whole night at their oars, without closing their eyes. Themistocles used misinformation as a weapon. His lie trapped the Greeks in the strait, leaving them no choice but to fight to the death, and at the same time exhausted the enemy's strength before the battle even began. When Eos, the goddess of dawn, touched the sky with her pink fingers, the Persians realized their mistake. They saw not the backs of fugitives, but a battle formation ready for death. But it was too late. The trap had snapped shut. The narrow strait of Salamis, where numbers ceased to matter, became their prison. Xerxes, confident in his divine right to victory, failed to take into account the most important thing. He was fighting not just against people, but against the very nature of Greece, which Themistocles had turned into his ally. The choice of the battle site was a cold calculation of genius. In 480 BC, he lured the Persian fleet into a narrow strait, where the open sea turned into a channel compressed by stone shores. For Xerxes' giant armada, this space became a deadly bottleneck. The ships, entering the strait in columns, interfered with each other, broke their oars against the sides of their own allies, and lost their ability to maneuver. A huge crowd tried to squeeze through the narrow door, and each new ship only added to the chaos. Themistocles, a true son of Athens, knew something that Xerxes' generals did not: the wind patterns. Every morning, a fresh wind began to blow from the sea. For the low Greek triremes, it was no hindrance, but for the tall Phoenician ships, with their cumbersome superstructures, this wind became a curse. Their high sides acted like sails, turning the ships sideways and exposing their vulnerable spots to the blows of the Greek rams. What had been an advantage for the Persians on the open sea, their height and numbers, became their downfall in the confines of the strait. The Greek ships began to row backwards without turning, as if retreating to the shore in fear. The Persians, mistaking this for panic, broke formation and rushed in pursuit. And at that moment, when the ranks of the barbarians were mixed, at a single signal from the trumpets, the Hellenes rushed forward. The battle turned into a melee. The main weapon of the Greeks was the bronze ram. Gathering speed, the triremes rammed into the sides of their unwieldy enemies with such force that they broke in half. Experienced crews used the Diasplov maneuver. They slipped between enemy ships, breaking their oars and turning them into helpless targets. The strait was filled with debris and bodies. The Persian ships carried the empire's best warriors, including the famous immortals, but their heavy armour dragged them to the bottom. In the chaos of battle, Admiral Ariabignes, Xerxes' own brother, was killed, which completely decapitated the invaders' fleet. The scale of the disaster was staggering. The mathematics of war were relentless. The Greeks lost about 40 ships, while the Persians lost more than 200, and the remaining ships lost their combat capability as a unified force. Xerxes, watching the carnage from his high throne, tore his clothes in horror. He executed several captains for cowardice, even though they had done everything possible, and this only further demoralized his army. Having lost a third of his fleet, Xerxes was forced to retreat, for without support from the sea, it became impossible to supply his huge army. The story of Themistocles teaches us an important lesson. One mind can be worth an entire army. But victory had a downside. The saviour of Hellas soon learned that the gratitude of the people is short-lived. After Salamis, he rose to the pinnacle of glory. Paradoxically, he received the greatest honours in Sparta, Athens' eternal rival. The Spartans, usually stingy with praise, presented him with an olive wreath for his wisdom and skill, gave him the best chariot, and even assigned a detachment of elite horsemen to escort him. The enemy on land recognized the superiority of the hero of the sea. The Athenians quickly forgot their fear of the Persians, but began to fear the ambitions of their savior. The memory of the smoke over the Acropolis faded, but irritation at Themistocles' harsh words grew. Democracy does not tolerate those who rise too high above the crowd. In 471 BC, the hero was expelled from the city by ostracism. The crowd, which had recently applauded him, now unanimously pushed him away. Later, he was falsely accused of treason, forcing him to flee to his former enemies. Fate played a cruel joke. The man who broke the backbone of the Persian Empire found refuge with Xerxes' son, King Artaxerxes, and began to serve him. However, history put everything in its place. Even Herodotus, the father of history, although he sympathized with Themistocles' political opponents, recognized his unique gift of foresight, the ability to instantly find the right solution at a critical moment. It was the fleet built at his behest that became the foundation on which the golden age of Athens, the Parthenon, and all of Western philosophy. The victory at Salamis was not a random miracle. It was the result of a perfectly constructed chain of events. First, Themistocles convinced the people to give up easy money for the sake of security. Then, he used force and cunning to hold together the crumbling alliance of city-states. And finally, he turned the enemy's fear into a weapon against itself. Salamis became the place where the huge machine of despotism crashed against flexibility and free spirit. The wooden walls stood firm, preserving the future of Europe. Themistocles remained in memory as a tragic and majestic figure. Legend has it that he drank bull's blood, considered a deadly poison at the time, so as not to lead the Persian fleet against his native Athens on the king's orders. Whether this is true or not, he paid for his gift of insight with eternal loneliness. Civilization moves forward on the shoulders of such titans, uncomfortable and ambitious, walking on the edge of the abyss. Xerxes feared Themistocles for good reason. He feared the power of the human mind. And I, Athena, continue to search among mortals for those in whose eyes I see the same fire, the fire of thought that once stopped an armada that covered the horizon.